Hey, I'm Thomas. I'm an engineer at Evervault, and in this video, we're going to take a look at Evervault's UI components primitive. So first of all, what are UI components? UI components are a set of pre-made and fully customizable components for collecting and displaying PCI data in a way that allows you to keep your PCI compliant scope to its simplest form. Let's say you're building a checkout page for an airline, and you need to capture some card details to accept a booking. In order to be secure, you want to avoid ever handling these card details in plain text. One approach to this problem would be to use our JS SDK to encrypt the card details in the browser before they're sent to your server. For most cases, this would be a totally secure approach. However, when it comes to payment details, we can do a little bit better, and we can reduce our PCI compliant scope even further. The problem with this approach is that our front-end code still has access to the card data in plain text, and it's possible for that data to leak outside of our codebase. For example, with a large selection of analytics tooling out there, it's possible one of these tools could capture a form submission event with the card number before it's encrypted. This is where UI components come in. UI components are embedded inside of an iframe hosted on Evervault's PCI compliant infrastructure and prevent your code from ever accessing the card data in plain text. Let's jump into some code and see how we can build this out. Okay, so here we have our basic checkout page, and the first thing we need to do to use UI components to collect card details is provide somewhere in the DOM for the component to mount. So if we come over to our HTML and we can duplicate this email field, we can delete the label and input inside of it, and I'm just going to provide a unique ID for this div. And then if we switch over to our JS, where we've already instantiated the Evervault client, we can create an instance of the card UI component by calling evervault.ui.card. And once we have this card component, we can mount it to the DOM by calling mount and passing a CSS selector of the DOM node where we want to inject it. If we come over to the browser now, you'll see that we have inputs for the card number, expiration, and CVC. By default, these components are completely unstyled, but we're going to get to styling them in a minute. For now, I want to show how we can use event listeners to actually get the encrypted card number out of the component. So if we open the browser console, switch over to the console tab, and then if we come back to our code, we can use the change event listener, and we're just going to log that to the browser console. And now you'll see that as we type out the card number, we get a series of console logs. And if we inspect those, we can see that we have the card number as an Evervault encrypted string, as well as some other information such as the brand. Okay, so now let's look at styling this so that it looks a little bit more like our email and cardholder inputs. So we'll close the console and switch back over to our code. We can style components by using a theme, and a theme is just a JS object with a styles key, which is some CSS rules defined as JS objects. So for example, we can select our inputs and define a 2-pixel border for all of those inputs. And let's include some padding and maybe increase the font size. In order to provide this theme to the component, we just need to pass it as a parameter. So now if we switch back over, we can see our inputs are starting to look a lot more like our email and cardholder ones. So next, we can see that the labels need a bit of spacing. So if we come back to our theme, we can add label, and let's add display, block, and let's add some margin bottom of 8 pixels. And if we save, we can now come back and see that the spacing is now the same. So what about the focus style? You can see that the cardholder and email have a purple border when they're focused, and our UI components don't. So if we come back over, we can actually use CSS pseudo selectors as a nested key and set the border color to purple. And now when we focus on our UI component inputs, we get the same styling. And lastly, we have the error message. If we actually inspect this inside of the iframe DOM, you'll see that this is a div with a class of error. And so we can actually come into the theme and select this error class. And then let's make them red. Let's reduce the font size and add a little bit of spacing. And now when we save and we get an error, you can see that we've styled that. So that's a brief walkthrough of UI components. And you can find all of the code for this example inside of our JS repo.